Welcome to this segment of Spirit at Work. Today we have as our guest Andrea Capuano. Andrea is the Director of Human Resources for the company ComDoc. Good to have you here, Andrea.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
I'm sure some folks probably even wonder, what kind of company is ComDoc? What do they do? And what do you do as a Human Resources Director there?
ComDoc is a provider of office equipment solutions, and we're a fully owned subsidiary of Xerox. Global Imaging Systems owns us, and we have been in business since 1955 and started here in the Akron area.
And as the Human Resources Director, what's your particular focus? Where do you spend a lot of your time?
Well, I have to say I have a fantastic team who takes care of a lot of the day-to-day things that human resources normally involves, staffing and getting people into the business and things like that. My focus is primarily on helping them to be the best that they can be, and then also taking that out to the organization. I focus primarily on our leadership development and helping our leaders practice good skills there. So.
You know, a lot of people out there see human resources in business as the dumping ground for a lot of personnel issues. How do you view your role as Director of Human Resources and the function of human resources out there at ComDoc?
Well, human resources is a really critical part of our business. If you think about bringing somebody into the business, it's our responsibility to find the right people to do the things that we need them to do. In addition to that, creating a culture where people feel that they're valued is important, and in a human resources role, that is a lot of what we do. We help people to understand the value that they bring to the organization, the contributions that they bring, and how they individually can help us meet our business goals.
Okay. How do you do that functionally? What do you do to provide for that kind of human development?
Well, there's a lot of one-on-one interactions at ComDoc, but we provide a lot of classes. We start with our leadership primarily, helping them to understand how to educate their teams. And we help people understand the vision from day one. It's a part of our interview process. It's part of our orientation. And then as you trickle down through the organization, we expect our managers to be able to identify those kinds of things and teach our folks. So it really starts with developing at the leadership level, and then having meetings, having training sessions, having a lot of feedback, giving feedback. Of course, we use outside organizations to help us develop folks too. We are big fans of Heart to Heart. We've taken almost 100 individuals through the Heart to Heart program, so we're real proud of that. But we do whatever we can, whatever we need to do, whether it's outside training, internal training, meetings, one-on-one, things like that.
Yeah. I know one of the areas we wanted to talk about today, there can be difficult emotions at work, and wondered in your role in human resources, what are some of those emotions that you've seen in the workplace that you've tried to respond to in your company?
Well, contrary to popular belief, human resources is not all fun and games. Actually, I think that I'm proud to say that we probably deal with the most difficult kinds of emotions. And as I said, I have a wonderful team who are very capable of handling things like that. But if you take, for example, somebody having to lose a job because we've downsized or a position's being eliminated, that would be handled by somebody in our department. Having a person being disciplined for inappropriate behavior, that would be handled by somebody in our department. Having a person with a medical issue or a disability, those are all difficult things that go on in the workplace. So we train our folks to address that. I feel that we're in the right roles for those types of things. We have the right people in the right roles to address those types of issues.
That's good.
You know, a lot of discussion about the current economic climate and its impact on business. I know ComDoc to be doing relatively well under the circumstances. In fact, very productive and continuing to be creative. What do you attribute that to?
100% toward our people. We have phenomenal people, and they find a way to get things done. And they feel inspired. They work hard. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we were once an employee-owned company, And we really believed in owning the business as an individual. And you've heard Riley say this before, Riley Lockridge, our retired CEO. I own myself, I own my department, I own the business, and that spirit still continues today. We really push people understanding how they fit and taking ownership, and people step up to the plate when I think they know that they're making that type of a difference in the organization.
I want to ask you about dealing with negative workers. I mean, we hear that a lot when we go out to various businesses. What suggestions do you have if somebody says, you know, our department's doing really well, the 7 or 8 of us, but there's this one person just very negative, yet this person does their work well, but we don't know how to deal with this negativity.
Right. It's funny because I'm going to tie it back to our values and our vision again. Our vision is a great place to work and a great place to be a customer. And our values are to be accountable, decisive, acting ethically, being passionate, and being trustworthy. And if you think about the behaviors that are associated with that, passion would be the one that would address the negativity piece. Since we talk about passion in the workplace, from the hiring all the way through orientation and into a person's performance appraisal, we would address that as not meeting the value that we have in the organization, one of our core values. And we do address it. We expect people to demonstrate passion for what they do. If you don't, I mean, not everybody's going to think that selling copiers and fax machines is sexy, even though we happen to think it is. So if you don't feel that way about what you're doing, then maybe there's a better place for you to be than in our organization.
Yeah.
Speaking of passion, I know that you've got passion for the work that you do. How does being Andrea flow into being the Director of Human Resources out there?
Well,
how's that fit for you?
You might want to ask some of my team that same question, and you might get some funny answers. I think that they have gotten used to the fact that I like to be a little different. I'm not a rule-oriented person, and a lot of people would shake their heads and say, in human resources, you have to have rules, you have to have guidelines, you have to have regulations. I think that there are always areas of gray, and if you're looking at an individual and taking things on a case-by-case basis, you can ensure that people are being treated fairly. And I think that's probably what I bring. I try to look at every situation as a unique situation. I don't blow things up that don't need to be blown up. So I think it's maybe a little bit of insight that I bring in, or patience for things that maybe are different than another HR person might experience.
I know one of the areas that you've had to deal with over recent years, you've had a number of employees who died during this time period. And what do you say, what's the proper role in the work environment of coworkers that may be grieving or dealing with this issue? How do you respond to that?
When you're working with individuals 40+ hours a week, they become a second family to you. And to not allow people to address their grief as a work issue, I think is unfair. We unfortunately have the same kinds of issues that other businesses have, and we've lost some pretty significant people in the past few years, and it hurts. There's a loss. We encourage folks to attend the funeral services. We try to do things to recognize and help the families if we can. We have created a memorial garden in our back behind our building for one of the folks that we lost a couple of years ago, and this would be another area where I feel I have some strength on my team, because when we lost somebody earlier this year, I was actually out of the country, so obviously I couldn't be there to deal with the immediate grief. And Diana Smith and Liz Forcioni, who you know, stepped up to the plate and just took care of the family, made sure that paperwork was getting finished, make sure that people were feeling okay. I couldn't have done it without them.
Yeah.
You know, you mentioned being an employee-owned company at one time, and then there was a transition with global imaging. Can you tell us a little bit about that transition and how that impacted the workplace and what you did to address it?
Well, it's interesting because we were just talking about grief, And one of the things that became clear after about a year into the acquisition was that we hadn't addressed the grief that our employees were feeling about losing what they believed to be their own company. And if you remember, we brought you two in to help us. We had a group of our leadership and some other key people together, and that was the prevailing thought, that we're still grieving because we're no longer a part of this ESOP community. And I think that when you address things like that, it helps to make the transition happen. I think that when any kind of transition has to be addressed. I don't think that you can ignore the elephant in the room. And when we did that, it seemed to make things better. So transition is always about how well one adapts to change. And some people adapt better than others do. It's actually the reason that we changed our values from adept to adapt, because we wanted people to understand that we need to be adaptive in this type of an environment. Business worlds are changing overnight, and we have to be ready for it.
I want to ask too, this program often explores the spiritual dimension. The spiritual dimension of this, you've talked about grief, transition, anything that you see there that's appropriate in bringing that up in the workplace, or even how that influences your own life?
Well, I happen to feel that if you leave your spiritual beliefs at the door, you don't bring every gift that you have to the table, and particularly in a role like the role that we're in human resources, people want to know the personal side of you. And I truly believe that I'm in the right role for me. I'm allowed to express how my spirituality has shaped me. And I truly believe that when I'm dealing with a counseling session, for example, with a grieving employee, or maybe somebody who is struggling in work, I'm not, the words are not coming from me, they're coming through me. And I'm using a gift that I was given in the right way.
How are you able to do that to accommodate a pluralistic workplace, representative of any number of spiritual traditions? How can you do that appropriately?
And it's a sensitive issue, and I think that we have to be aware that regardless of somebody's tradition, whether it existed or didn't exist, there is a series of values that exists within that individual that drives who they are. And if you can take it down to, what do you value in life? What are the things that you want to be remembered for? Or how do you want to impact the world? When you can settle on those commonalities, it doesn't matter what religion or whether the religion even exists, it doesn't matter. So I think you can get to it by focusing on values as opposed to religious traditions. And that's how I do it.
What about when you're dealing with some folks and you have a sense that maybe they need professional help or help beyond your talking to them or their supervisor talking to them? How do you kind of discern that, and what do you do with that?
We're very fortunate. We have an employee assistance program, and that would be our first step. We would advise people to contact that program. If it's necessary, we may mandate it because maybe whatever the issue is has affected their work behaviors to the point where we know they need help, and we need them to get help in order to remain employed. And so we might do a handoff with that EAP to get them into some kind of a session with them, and that's always a great starting point. We utilize outside resources, again, like yourselves. There's other resources in the area for training that we use. We have a great relationship with Kent State University in Stark County, and we've used an organization out of Massachusetts called GMBetty. So we have several organizations. The ERC in Cleveland's another one. There's great places to go if somebody has needs that we're not able to fill within ComDoc.
Real quickly now, could you sum up in about 30 seconds how you're able to balance all that you do, you know, family, work, and I know you personally and ComDoc both do a lot of community work too. What's the secret to keeping a balanced life? You hear that word balance quite a bit out there in the business and professional world.
I don't know that I have figured that out yet. I don't know of any professional, particularly women, who have, but I will tell you I have a very, very supportive husband, Mark, who you've met. My children are very supportive as well. And I think that in order to balance all of that, you have to have a community around you. So developing a great staff, having a great set of friends, having a marriage that is, that's supportive, that's how you do it. Because nobody's ever going to perfect it. It's just not possible. So you have to rely on others to help.
Well, hey, thank you for your helping us and everybody watching and listening here. You've given us so much to reflect upon, and you're such an example of great workplace spirit. And we're going to come back after a moment with a closing segment in which Larry and I share a few final reflections based on a great conversation we've had here with Andrea. Welcome back to this closing segment of Spirit at Work, in which Larry and I reflect a little on what our guest has shared with us, Andrea Capuano. Larry, go ahead.
You know, once I was at a continuing legal education seminar, and a lawyer stood up with a lot of conviction, and he said, "We have no right to impose our moral code on the people we represent or in the workplace." You know, and I thought about that, and I said, you know, that fellow's right. We do have no right to impose our personal code on anyone else. But I began to think that maybe the bigger question isn't whether we can impose a moral code. The bigger question is, do we have a moral code to begin with? What we do about it is another question. And as Andrea was speaking, I was thinking of the emphasis that she mentioned and the company has on aligning your personal values with the company's values. You know, and during this holiday season, maybe it's a good time to reflect upon, what do you value? What are you grounded in? What is your moral code? How is it developing? And is who you are really expressing itself in what you do in work, in family, and in the larger community?
And what strikes me from that too, and Andrea brought it up, that there's an underlying spirituality, however we name it, and as she said so well, everybody has core values or a sense of meaning and purpose to their life, however they describe it, and saying you don't all of a sudden come into work and leave that at home. Very struck by that, how we live a congruent life and bring that spirituality, that passion, that sense of caring about people to work. Andrea obviously does that very well. What I'm struck is not only what she said, but the way she said it. Because in the end, I think all of us are a positive influence on people, not only by what we say, but by our very being. By just, it shows in our core. It obviously showed in Andrea in terms of her passion and her desire to really help people be at their best at work.
Absolutely.
And that wraps us up today, and we hope all of you will stop and again reflect on those core values and that spirit that drives you and how you can tap into that all the more.